Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about some Fire Emblem Gaiden maps. So I've been doing some map tier lists, and I've been doing some talking about map design, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Gaiden map design, but I figured I might as well do the tier list while I'm at it. So, Fire Emblem Gaiden and Fire Emblem Shadows of Valencia by extension kinda gets a really bad rep when it comes to having bad map design. Like, for instance, just take a look at this. This is every playable map in Gaiden, not including repeat maps, not including, maps which you play multiple times. I will talk about them a little bit, roughly in order. I don't believe I'm capturing my cursor, but what you can see is that you're getting maps where, okay, there's some forest, there's some of those heal tiles, some of these maps have, like, the unit deployments on them, some of them don't. But you have some forests, you have some heal tiles, you have some buildings, you have the one graveyard map, which gets used 2 or 3 times. There's only one map in Gaiden that has graves on it. A couple boat maps, open fields, a couple desert maps, a couple swamp maps, a volcano map. And then you have a lot of maps that are very featureless. A lot of maps, especially towards the end of the game, that don't really have a lot going for them. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about why, and about how this affects gameplay, but I wanted to talk a little bit first, before I start getting into tiering the maps, about what appears to be Fire Emblem Gaiden's method of making maps. Fire Emblem Gaiden, for the most part, outside of some small number of maps, like we'll see it more in like the opening maps, tends to be, and then some of the ending maps. Fire Emblem Gaiden's map design tends to not be gameplay first. It tends to be location first, story first, if you can call it story first, but tends to be location first. So for instance, you have a very interesting map in like the Sluice Gate. You have this other gate from Celica's side, which players of Awakening will remember as, I believe it's Inigo's Paralog? Yeah, I think it's Inigo. You have some of the approach to Regel Castle maps. The long lines where Bonites shoot arrows at you. The bridge that's down with the waterfall. The Regel Castle itself. Those are fun set pieces first, that then become used as gameplay tools. However, maps that aren't necessarily, if it's just a fight in a field, you just get a field. This map that everyone hates so much, that you see like 20 times in Alm's Route, it's really more like 6, if that. Probably closer to 3 or 4, but it feels like so much because it's such a bland, featureless map with nothing on it. It's just an open field that you fight some cavalry on, or fight some archers on, or whatever. And so because Fire Emblem Gaiden does maps as locations first, and gameplay set pieces second, you end up running into a lot of issues where people say that's bad map design. Where there's nothing here. It's literally just a square room with, a square room with some enemies in it. It's a square room with a couple forest tiles in it. It's literally 4 square rooms that your units are subdivided into. They're very bland, they're very basic, it gets the job done. And the only maps that are notable for maybe more extreme reasons. What are the bosses on the map? What are the lines of approach? What just happened before in the story? What's going to happen during or after this in the story? And that's why Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valencia, does so well despite these maps, is that it's able to use them to build its story on top of. It's a very blank slate, if you will, because these maps are all just locations first. However, they don't necessarily work in terms of gameplay first, whereas you look at something like Path of Radiance, you look at something like Radiant Dawn, even something like GBA Fire Emblems. Most of those maps do location well, but are also gameplay first and gameplay forward. They're interesting to play, whereas a lot of these maps, they're not necessarily interesting. It's only interesting insofar as how do you deal with these enemies when you're not given any tactical advantage from the map itself, or very limited tactical advantage. But let's get on to the actual tiering of the maps, as we can kind of then discuss that. I will try to go in order. And you know, it's really sad when I feel like the very first map you get, the effectively prologue or intro map, is one of the better maps in the game. Am I tiering these maps according to how I would tier maps in general, or am I tiering these maps according to how I feel about them in the game? The latter one. I'm definitely tiering them in regards to, is this the best or worst map relative to the game? Whereas I feel like a lot of these maps would definitely place lower if they were compared to maps from other Fire Emblem games. So for instance, you might say, oh, A tier. Why is this map an A tier? It's a very basic map. Well, yes, but it has some terrain features, it has some detail, makes you think a little bit. I'm gonna put that over a map that is just an open field, probably. Yeah, maybe it's B tier. But I'm not going to give every single Gaiden map F tier and D tier and whatever, because I don't think that they really deserve that, and I don't think that helps us discuss what makes these maps interesting or different, even if we can say, yeah, most of these maps, relative to other games, are hot garbage. Moving on, we have forests and 2 forts. Your allied fort, enemy fort, forest in between. It's reused like one time pretty late into the game. It's another B tier map. It's solid. It gets the job done. I don't like the dungeon maps. The square with absolutely nothing in it, I think it's just a bad map. It's only stressful because you have enemies that can just attack you from wherever no matter what, so you have to block them. When you go back and watch, Excelblum's like prologue playthrough of Fire Emblem 12, and he says that one of these maps can be accurately described as a knife fight in a phone booth with 8 participants. That's what these dungeon maps sometimes feel like. They're a little bit roomier, but especially when you have like gargoyles in these dungeon maps, they're just not fun to play. Possibly one of the best maps in the game, but we'll see. You have the slow approach. You have the mercenary that climbs the mountain down to get to you, so you have kind of a timer built in with that. You have the enemies that charge through the pass. You can then go to, and there's not an enemy that hides in the healing room by default, but if you put them in healing AI and leave them, they might go there. But then that allows you to go there and hide there while the mercenary is trying to climb the mountain. If you have a mage, the mercenary can be pretty easily dealt with. If you don't, then it's a real tough problem because you don't have any weapons, so you're fighting at base stats, while the mercenary has a leather shield, which is +3 defense. Debating putting this into S tier. I think I'll leave it in A tier for now because I think there are other maps that are better, but this is definitely one of the strongest maps in the game, which is also kind of sad considering this is like the 3rd actual map. You have your first fort map. Maybe I put these too high. Yeah. You have your first actual fort map. It's only used once before you get Claire. It introduces you to forts are really dangerous. Archers really suck to fight against. It does its job well. It probably is, though, a C tier map because... Yeah, I'll just reverse that. It's a C tier map because even though there are trees, they're not really in places that you can utilize. And so you're constantly fighting against an enemy who just has flat out more defensive cover than you do because they're on the 40 avoid inside castle tiles, whereas you're just attacking from the plains. It just feels bad, but I'm not necessarily gonna... Maybe I'll put it like D tier. At the very least, it's more interesting of a map to play. You have this map with a single fort and some scattered forests. You can do some stuff with the forests. They're scattered around enough that you can actually play with them and use them to your advantage. And so yeah, I think it's a B tier map. The famous one river through the middle map. There's a river through the middle and a bridge that you hold out on. There's enemies, usually like cavaliers that come from the far corner. Sometimes some cavaliers that come just from the left on your side of the river. And then there's usually some strong enemies on the other side of the river that you need to smartly take on, either at the bridge or within the forests that are positioned over here. I think it's actually a pretty decent map. As far as Gaiden maps go, it's probably up there among some of the better ones. I'm not saying it's a good map, but I'm saying it's probably decent. A lot of these maps will be going down in tiers as I go on in the map. In fact, I should probably do that right now. Yeah, that feels a little bit better. You have the attack on Zofia Castle, which is an interesting map which asks you to do some stuff with your flyers. Flyers being Claire. Only Claire. The door, technically, if you fly around the other side of the door, you can open it, but that's really dumb because then you just die to archers. What you really do is just charge forward across this bridge, and then go through this entrance, and then go through this one. Technically, if you defeat Dozel, you can get his Draco shields. No one's really going to be doing that in any sort of playthrough of Gaiden. Actually, I don't even necessarily remember if you can do it in Gaiden. I know you can do it in Echoes. I don't remember if you can do it in Gaiden. Archers on the walls are threatening. The choke point at the gate allows you to fight against Slater and his knights without necessarily getting immediately overwhelmed. And then it kind of is a slow approach up to the Arcanist in the middle. It's a fine map. It does its job pretty decently well. I think probably better than these other maps where you just have kind of some scattered forests to defend. It really says, hey, be careful of this terrain. Get in as soon as you can, because when you're outside, you're exposed. Kind of like D tier. Like, I called it D tier. Kind of like this map over here. But I think it does a better job of having some more interesting variety, considering you have Claire. You have access to Claire, whereas in this map you don't. Graveyard map. At least it's more interesting, but graveyards suck. It's plus 60 avoid if you're standing on a gravestone tile. You have a lot of monsters, and you have a lot of mages to fight the monsters, and so you can hit them no matter where they are, because terrain doesn't affect avoid against magic, but if you stand on grave tiles, they have a really hard time hitting you. It's a very easily solved map, and then it just kind of becomes tedious and subject to RNG if you get hit by low hit rates. Not a great map. Then you have boat maps. You have you and a slightly bigger boat, you and a much bigger boat, and then the boat landing to attack the bandits with the green units stranded out there. I kind of like all these maps. I think they're all A-tier maps. Both of these maps get reused at least twice, if not 3 or 4 times. So some versions you'll fight a Cantor, some versions you'll fight pirates, some versions you'll fight a mix of enemies. I think they're all solid maps because, again, terrain features, choke points. They make it kind of interesting to fight on. Though I will say I think the small boat map is a lower tier map because it only has the 1 choke point, whereas at least with this you have 2 choke points to worry about and manage. Gives you some variety in play. Once again, I wouldn't ordinarily put these maps anywhere close to A tier because they're so simple and basic, but this is Fire Emblem Gaiden we're talking about, and this kind of is some of the best maps that Celica will ever play on, unfortunately. You have the Draco Zombie map, which I think is just really boring. It's just Draco Zombie flies out, and then you either have Seraphim and you kill it, or you don't, and then you very slowly and carefully try to kill it while not losing all your units, and trying to make it hit Valbar. Not as bad as literal square room with enemies, but pretty bad map nonetheless. You have this map, which is more interesting, Katria and Pala's join map. You have the... Actually, I'm going to put B tier because of starting zones. You start right here, the enemies start right here, and there's one enemy over here, and like a couple enemies over here. So you have to fight your way up to Katria and Pala, who are over here. I think it's a fine map. I think it works well. It's only used once. Maybe it's used a second time, I forget. I guess, no, you can fight It's only used once deliberately, but overworld enemies can fight you again on the map. It's fine, it does its job. It teaches you that some of these tiles, the desert tiles, slow you down. Going through rivers sucks, so you have the bridge. It's a fine map, maybe. Don't really have too much else to say about it, though. Open field with some forests. This map in particular is used in the set piece where you fight 3 paladins. In Echoes and Shadows of Valencia, it's retooled to be Ferdinand, Berkut, and a 3rd paladin. In Gaiden, it's just 3 paladins, and Ferdinand and Berkut do not exist in that game. It's a D-tier map. You start out surrounding the enemy, and you soon realize that's a bad idea because the enemy's a lot stronger than your units are unless you grinded. So, yeah, D-tier map, not super great. We have the Desert Archer Fort. I think it's probably C-tier, though at the same time, it's a desert map, and so I hesitate. Maybe I put that too low. Yeah, that probably feels a little bit better. All these maps are pretty neutral. This one sucks because you have a fort full of archers, and it's desert trying to approach, and so only your flying units can approach, but they're archers. Granted, effective damage doesn't really exist because base bows don't do effective damage because they have 0 base might. But it's not really a super pleasant map to play on. It's not as bad as like these featureless maps, but it's not super enjoyable. That's not Geetz's fortress. That is Rescue Matilda map. It's probably A tier as well. Lots of forest outside to tackle enemies in. You have the long bridge choke point, which probably puts it down in B tier. And then you have the open inside area where you're fighting against Dozel, you're fighting against some Cantor summoning zombies. Matilda's in here doing her thing. She can kind of die. You're fighting against some archers. It's a decent map, pretty solid set piece. You only have to play it once. Not bad. This map is probably another C-tier generic map because you fight enemies around a heal point in forests, and there's a lot of open space around you. I think this is one of the first maps where you fight witches on. I think you have like 1 witch, maybe 2. No, I think you have another repeat of one of these maps that you fight a witch on first, and then you fight a witch on this map as well. It's a fine map, once again, not really super interesting. You have this map, which I think goes in subscribe tier. I think this is maybe the only S tier map in the game is the Sluice Gate. You have a lot of mages, but you have a lot of ways of dealing with them. You have... And I think this is the only kill boss map. I think every other map is route. In Shadows of Valencia, I know that's true. All you have to do is kill the boss. I think in Gaiden, you still have to kill all enemies. But if you kill the boss, then Dute becomes an ally unit. Dute is Delthia. That's, yeah. Overall, though, I like the map. Makes you fight against a lot of mages, makes you really value things like high resistance that Matilda or Silk have, and then makes you approach it in an interesting way. You have a side objective, you have a character you don't want to kill. How do you... But that character will also suicide into your units and use very high damage spell. Aura, not Ragnarok. How do you deal with that? It asks you a question and just kind of says, figure it out, and then you have to use your own tools, be it warping Alm to the boss or something like that, to solve it. I like it. I like the map, I like the idea of it. I think, could it be done better? Yes, I think Shadows of Valencia did it a lot better by making it kill boss. If it did, if it didn't, if it's still route, then maybe... It probably was still route, but you just kill the boss so you can recruit Delthia. Either way, I like it. Solid map, probably the best map in the game, which is kind of sad, really. Maybe these boat maps aren't quite as good. Maybe this map is better. I keep changing my mind on these maps. This is just going to be a constant struggle of where do I place these maps. Okay, you have fighting either Dean or Sonia in a desert. You either start on top or you start on bottom, and then the other group starts in the other location, and then it's either a lot of mages or it's a lot of mercenaries. It's a whatever map. Maybe it's here because it's not like terrible to play. It's just kind of boring. You have Geats' Fortress, which I do think is a better map. One, there's not quite as much desert that slows you down obnoxiously. Two, there's a really threatening enemy. Three, there is this one random guy out here, which is just frustrating to fight. You have a lot of summons from a Cantor that get summoned and flood down these tracks, so it encourages you to go, to push forward. Can't really turtle this map. There's some archers, but there are not too many. Yeah, screw it. This is an A tier map. I like Geats' Fortress. That can go down, back down to B tier. I like Geats' Fortress. It's a solid map. This map I think also is pretty good, where you're fighting up the cliff, and then you have... This map is good if you have promoted flyers. If you've promoted Katria or Pala or both of them, then you get to see them chew through gargoyles. Otherwise, it's a very, very stressful map where you get bombarded by gargoyles constantly while you're having to go through the forest and then eventually slowly fight into the Mila Temple itself. Either way, through either stress or fun and enjoyment, engagement, it's probably an A tier map. This map gets reused twice. I think one time it's used and you just fight a lot of basic enemies on it and it's not very fun. One time you play it and you have a single Biggle on the map and, not Duma, Jeddah, and Jeddah on the map. On that map, it's more interesting because then you have the choice. Do you just kill the Biggle right away? Or do you try and get Jeddah's Draco Shield, letting the Biggle multiply to the point that it can just overwhelm you? Because the clones that it makes of itself can make more clones of themselves. And then you can just get to a point where you physically can't kill them as fast as they multiply. Unless randomness RNG decides that it's not going to clone as much today. An exceedingly stressful map, and so I think that version of the map is like an A tier map. The other version of this map is like pretty bad. So I'm going to leave it at D tier because it's the map itself, it's not necessarily the enemies on it. Because it's a reused map. But it's still somewhat engaging, somewhat interesting. Here you have, you fight against Saizo, the Dread Fighter, and a number of other mercenaries or myrmidons and witches, a number of witches. A lot of forest, but I like how there's kind of small objectives to take. First you have your this healing area, then you have the corner, and then you have the far corner over here. And then there are enemies kind of all throughout which fight you. And so I think because of that, because of kind of the multi-stage feeling nature of the map, it's a little bit better than these C tier maps. These are down in C tier. Maybe that should be in C tier as well. Yeah, that feels a little bit better. And I'll probably title these tiers a little bit better as well. Another D tier swamp map, who would have guessed? You're just trudging through something that not only slows your movement like the desert, but also hurts you as you go. Makes you really appreciate Bishop Noma if you recruited him, because he self-heals, and I think auto-heals. No, he self-heals, Maybe it's only if he has a ring he self-heals. No, if you promote one of your... If you promote Jenny into a saint, then she doesn't just self-heal, but she heals automatically those around her in adjacent tiles for the same amount of damage that they would have taken, I think is how it works. I think that's how Saint works in this game. So it makes you appreciate them. But other than that, it's just a slow slog of a map that's not fun. And same thing with the zombie dragon version of the map. You have Palacatria and Est at this point. You'll want to have promoted them all in order to make this map any semblance of playable, because otherwise you're just getting harassed by zombie dragons while you try to travel through a swamp. You want to send them in to snipe the Cantor and then kill the zombie dragons and gargoyles. That's what you want to do. If you don't have them, this map becomes like downright nearly unplayable, because not only are you going from here in the swamp all the way over to here, the one entrance, but then you also have to fight in the entrance when archers and gargoyles and zombie dragons are flooding around you trying to kill you. Not a pleasant experience. D tier. Possibly even E tier, but I think E tier is reserved for maps that just are featureless nothings. You have the split map, where you have to send some units up to deal with the witch that... I forget if this witch clones herself, or if this witch... I think this witch clones herself and then sends the clones out to teleport behind you. Meanwhile, you have some other stronger physical enemies down here, so it encourages you to split your units to deal with it in a more effective manner. Other than that, it's an okay map. Because of the split nature of it, I think probably it's B tier, but you're getting to see more as we get into the end game. There's no forest on this map. Like, there might be like one or two, but I can't tell. No, there's not. There's nothing. There are no features on this map at all. It is either a mountain or plains, or like a little box of healing tile. And this is where it starts to get just really, really obnoxious. You have this, it's another dungeon tile, but instead of fighting in the square room, you're fighting in the next room, which has a little bit of swamp tile and some gravestones. Because it has some features, I'm going to call it E tier, even though I think this is F tier for featureless. E tier... yeah. That goes in featureless as well. Yes, you have 3 forests. They don't really come up into play. It's just obnoxious. I forget if this is even a playable map or just a walking map, too. Not great. Nui Baba's Abode. Definitely A tier, if not S tier. I don't think I can give it S tier, though. It's not that interesting. But I feel like I've rated all these other maps too high, then. I like Nui Baba's Abode. I think it could definitely be improved. I think it could definitely be better. But as far as Gaiden maps go, this is one of the few maps that I remember playing, and that I remember having some semblance of fondness while playing. It's a solid place map that also doubles as a somewhat interesting combat map, because you're starting to get promoted units, especially if you have like Dread Fighters, maybe a Gold Knight, Claire might be a Falcon Knight. So you're fighting really strong enemies. You have to go this looping path up and around. Meanwhile, you have Nui Baba, who either has a magic ring or just the death spell has 5 range at base. She has a spell that knocks you down to 1 hit point. But you get a mirror shield if you do her dungeon right before, which decreases all magic hit rates on you to 10%. Gives you 90% magic void. Hard-coded. Gaiden loves its hard-coded item stats. And so the idea is you get the magic shield, you use the magic shield on whoever you're sending up to either fight Nui Baba or distract Nui Baba while you send your other units up. And then you use the other stuff you found in there, like the speed ring, to dash up, get in the face of everyone, and really bring it to them. Either like a Gold Knight or even a Baron with a speed ring can get up there and fight and just wreck shop, while you have whoever has the mirror shield taking on Nui Baba. That's the idea of the map, and that's how it plays. And if you play it like that, it's really, you know, maybe not fun, super fun, but it's enjoyable and memorable. And you have a strategy, you execute the strategy. If you don't have those items, though, if you take those away, or you nerf them severely like Echoes did, this map becomes a lot more of a slog, and becomes a lot harder, and becomes a lot, I think, less fun to play, even though you have the extra tools of, like, weapon arts and whatnot. I think this map somehow becomes better in Gaiden than it is in Echoes, because Gaiden gives you the more overpowered Speed Ring, Magic Ring, and Mirror Shield, versus Echoes versions, which have been nerfed into the ground in order to balance them out. I think also A tier, but a little bit lower A tier, is not the other sluice gate, but the other gate, Duma Gate. You have a couple cantors that summon gargoyles. This is actually where I got the Starlight Lance, the Astra Lance, in my Gaiden playthrough on YouTube. It dropped from a random gargoyle. It has like a 0.0055% chance or some super stupidly low percent chance to drop, and I got it. And I will probably never see it again. But it's an A tier map because you have a choke point, and then you fight inside where you have walls and ways to move your units, and it's not like you can also fly your flyers over enemies and around them, and you're encouraged to do so, but it's not like force required like it feels like with like the swamp maps or the desert maps, because your rest of your units aren't slowed down, they're just blocked by choke points. I think it's an interesting map that requires interesting approaches, and because that, it's an A tier map for Gaiden standards. This map technically has features, but I'm going to call it featureless. I think you have to fight in... I think there's like a Biggle inside here that you have to fight into, and then there's some other monsters or mages or witches or whatever outside. But you have to fight into the Biggle quickly, because otherwise it'll spawn and multiply, just like over here. 4 squares. Each unit has to fight another... You bring 4 units. Each unit has to fight another unit. 3 rows. You bring 3 units. Each unit has to fight another unit. Why is Duma Tower filled with these mini micro maps? The slow approach with Bow Knights. Warp makes this map enjoyable. Without Warp, this map is miserable. And that's kind of all I have to say about it. It's kind of fun. It's kind of interesting. You have the volcano that traps you in. It sucks. It gets more and more dragons the more times you have to play it, so this is basically your punishment for playing Alms Route first, is that you're stuck in the volcano while Celica has to do a map, and every time you move on the overworld, you have to fight another battle against even more dragons. If you're not careful in your unit order and placement, and if you can't kill dragons fast enough, you will lose units here. That is just kind of how it's designed. And as I guess it does its job. It's a very threatening map that you don't want to be in for very long. The first time you play it, it's kind of an E tier whatever map. But if you get up to where there's like 9+ Necro Dragons in the map, then it's like C tier because it's very threatening. But then it also kind of starts coming back down again because the map is just... It's probably ends up settling in D tier. You have the Waterfall Bridge map. It's fine. It's not super interesting. It's a little threatening because the enemies are strong. But by this point, it honestly is probably one of Alm's worst maps. Maybe even D tier. Nah, it's still C tier. The map where you fight Rudolph, Rigel Castle, that's probably the last A tier map in the game. Because it's the last one that's interesting. You want to fight... Maybe this is an actual defeat boss map. No, I feel like every map in Gaiden is a route map. If there is a defeat boss map, it's this one, and then the sluice map is like the secondary. But yeah, fight against Rudolph. It's tough, it's interesting, there's a lot of very strong enemies. It's your last chance to kind of really fight a full army. versus before you just get down to a lot of skirmish maps versus monsters and a couple of like very elite units. You have this map, which I don't honestly remember, and it seems very dumb. So I'm putting it in E tier. I'm also going to put this map in E tier. Again, it's completely unmemorable. Maybe there's like another Biggle you fight or something. I'm putting that down in featureless tier. Technically, you have a swamp feature down here and these two little healing tiles, but it's not that interesting. This map is D tier because it's at least memorable. You have Alm. You fight through all these monsters, like you hide in the healing tile and fight all the masses of monsters with Alm before you proceed and get Falchion. This map is E tier. It's just barely not featureless, but I might just put it featureless anyway. I don't remember who you fight in here. It's not important. It doesn't matter. This map sucks too. And then Duma's map is actually kind of interesting. And probably A tier. But yeah. Basically, what I've come to the decision of... Because yeah, this is the final chapter. You fight Duma up here. You fight all of his different, mages and whatnot. You have like a trio of, I believe they're either Dread Fighters, or it's like a Dread Fighter, a Baron, and a Gold Knight up here. More interesting, more difficult map. It's the finale. You get all of Alm's army and all of Celica's army, and fight with all of them. It's probably only interesting because you get everyone. And then you can kind of use crazy warp shenanigans to break it. Yeah. What I'm getting from this map tier list, though, ultimately, when I go down the list, is that the early game, and this is something that I hadn't thought of before I just saw all the maps in a row. The early game maps give you a lot of forest. They give you a lot of cover. They give the enemies either no cover, or they give them forts to hide in. Really emphasizing defender's advantage. Forts are strong. You want to take the fort, rush into the fort. Don't get caught outside the fort. Fight in the forest, fight in the woods, use the terrain to your advantage. Fight in the forts, don't get caught outside the forts. Boat maps. Strategically use your choke points, the gangplanks, to attack enemies from. And then you start getting deeper and deeper into the game where it's like, the terrain is a little more sparse, or the terrain is more enemy-favored, or the terrain is just more of a hindrance. It slows you down like the desert. It hurts you and slows you down like the swamp. It's impassable to all but flyers, like the lava. You start to get maps where terrain just kind of is like, seems like features that block your progress. You get the occasional interesting fort, like the Bridge Gate here, the Sluice Gate up here, Nui Baba's Palace, Rigel Castle, the Geats' Desert Fortress, the Temple of Milla. You get these maps that are interesting places that also end up being interesting maps. And then this map out here, which is just kind of like, oh hey, it's your first time fighting an enemy that has an item. Oh shoot, this is big. Other than that, the maps are kind of mindless, not mindless slogs, but like, they have rough qualities. You're given more features to abuse, to focus on, to avoid things more. And then as you get later in the game, the maps stop being even-handed, hey, use this to your advantage, and start getting more, this is a deliberate hindrance for you. This is deliberately trying to make your day worse, make your path worse, make things harder for you. To the point then that it gets to, there are no features on the map, it is just a trap, it is just a problem, it is just you and the enemy in front of you, and you are strong enough to fight, and if you're not strong enough to fight, then that's your own fault. And that's kind of what the maps become. The music just died out. I should have chosen a longer playlist. I didn't realize I'd be talking for almost an hour. Anyway, this is probably my final thoughts on the maps are S tier for Sluice Gate tier, best map. A tier for an interesting location. They make their interesting locations interesting to fight on, plus this place here. B tier, how would I describe B tier? I can't make this. I can't start this with B. It's not gonna work. Some strategy required. You can't necessarily just rush in. You have to kind of think about how you're doing things on these maps. Some strategy required. C tier. Not all these maps are forests. I was gonna say, like, forests make it fun. Not all these maps are forests. C tier. Minor strategic elements. Not quite as much as these ones in B tier, but there are some minor strategic elements. D tier is just designed to not be fun. You have all the swamps. You have the most annoying desert chapter. You have the paladin field map. And then you have, I guess, yeah, that's probably E tier. And then these maps are just featureless. Yeah, but let me know what you think about Fire Emblem Gaiden maps. Let me know if you think that any of these maps are salvageable at all, if you think all these maps are terrible. Let me know what you think of the discussion that I had at the start, where Gaiden uses its maps more as place settings than as actual strategic game boards. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this tier list. Let me know what you think, and until next time, this is Mythril Zenith, signing out.